I went down the rabbit hole, and what I found left me with more questions than answers. Google, is it okay to give my baby formula? And you'll see pretty reassuring results. Official health sites, Reddit threads, blogs, all saying things like, yes, it's okay, or formula is a safe alternative to breast milk for babies up to 12 months old. Even the classic, you do you. Just make sure to prep it properly. But here's the thing, none of that really answers the question, does it? I wasn't asking for encouragement. I wasn't looking for a pat on the back. What I was really asking was, what's in formula? How is it made? And is it regulated carefully enough for me to trust it? Have you ever wondered what's in that tin? Or if all formulas are really the same? Have you questioned why it's marketed so heavily? Or if these companies are really just profiting off new parents' insecurities and lack of knowledge? Well, today, I'm cutting through the noise. I'll give you the facts, no guilt, no sugarcoating, so you can make an informed decision for your baby. There's already so much pressure on mums, and I'm not here to add to that, but we can't ignore the facts either. Today, we're going to uncover the truth about formula, the ingredients, the marketing, the regulations, and who's really benefiting. This isn't about guilt or persuasion, it's about transparency, because you can't make an informed choice without knowing the facts. Think of this like turning over the label on a product you've bought hundreds of times. We'll read the fine print together. Let me clear the air before we get started. This isn't about judging anyone's choices. Parenting is hard enough without the extra pressure or guilt, and every family situation is different. My only aim here is to provide the facts so you can feel empowered to make the decisions that work best for you and your baby. In fact, I would love to know if you gave your baby formula and how you decided which brand to use. Let me know in the comments. It might really help other parents make a decision. Deciding how to feed your baby is one of the first big decisions you'll make as a parent. And let's be honest, it's not just about what works best for your baby. It's also kind of what works best for you too. Breastfeeding, formula pumping, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. But I believe that no matter how you feed your baby, you deserve real information, not just empty reassurance. And that's where things get a little bit murky when it comes to formula. The conversation is often dominated by two extremes, either shaming parents who don't breastfeed or going so far to reassure formula users that we don't question what's actually in it. As a former paramedic, I strongly believe in autonomy and fully informed, uncoerced consent. That means no persuasion, just facts, so we can make up our own minds. When you walk down the formula aisle at the supermarket, there's a wall of brands with glowing claims about brain development, immunity, easy digestion, and being close to breast milk. But what do those claims actually mean? And what's in that tin? And why are some formulas $10 or £10, while others are more like $40? Here's what we'll cover. What's in formula, how it compares to breast milk, and the million-dollar industry that's shaping what's on our store shelves. And the surprising ways formula is regulated, or sometimes not regulated, by the FDA and other agencies. So, let's get started. Let's start with the basics. What's actually in formula? The short answer is that manufacturers claim that formula is designed to closely match the composition of breast milk. While there are some different types catered to special circumstances, it's usually made from cow's milk and is a processed food with ingredients selected to meet specific nutritional standards set by agencies like the FDA in the US and the Food Standards Agency in the UK. To put this into perspective, let's look at two of the most popular formulas on the market. In the US, Similac 360 Total Care is a top seller. It contains 49 ingredients, including soy oil and a source of DHA derived from algae. In the UK, Aptamil First Infant Milk dominates the shelves with 41 ingredients, including fish oil and prebiotics like galacto-oligosaccharides. Both are designed to meet strict nutritional standards, but the sheer number of processed ingredients highlights just how different formula is from breast milk, which is naturally tailored to your baby's needs. Here's what you'll typically find in a tin of formula. Proteins like cow's milk protein or soy protein, sometimes hydrolyzed to make it easier for babies to digest. Fats, often a blend of vegetable oils like palm, soy, or coconut oil, along with DHA and ARA, fatty acids associated with brain and eye development. Carbohydrates, which can include lactose, maltodextrin, corn syrup solids, or other sugars like sucrose or glucose syrup. Plus, added vitamins, minerals, and sometimes probiotics or prebiotics. Now, these ingredients aren't inherently bad, but they come with some controversy. Take corn syrup solids, for example. It's a common carbohydrate source in lactose-free formulas, but some studies suggest it's metabolized differently than lactose and might even contribute to obesity risks later in childhood. And then there's soy oil and soy-based formulas, which contain phytoestrogens. These are plant-based compounds that mimic estrogen, and while the long-term effects on infants aren't fully understood, they've raised enough questions to make some parents uneasy. And palm oil, a common fat source in many formulas. It's cheap and effective, but research shows it can interfere with calcium absorption, potentially leading to harder stools and even lower bone density in some babies, which could affect long-term bone health. Notice I say could. Well, we need more long-term studies to fully understand the impact of reduced bone mineralization in infancy on adult bone health and overall growth. But what about organic or ethical formulas like Kendamil and HIP? Are they actually better, or is it just marketing? I'll cover that shortly. One of the biggest differences between breast milk and formula is that breast milk is a living food. It contains antibodies, live cells, and enzymes that can't be replicated in a lab. Formula, on the other hand, relies somewhat on synthetic versions of those nutrients. But here's a question. Are all these ingredients even necessary? Take DHA and ARA, for example. These fatty acids are often added to support brain and eye development, which sounds great. But multiple studies, including a systematic review, found little measurable benefit from DHA supplementation in formula-fed infants compared to breastfed infants. And then there are the synthetic human milk oligosaccharides, or HMOs, added to mimic the immune-boosting properties of breast milk. While promising, these artificial versions don't fully replicate what breast milk does, and the evidence for their long-term effects is still limited. The necessity and efficacy of these additives continue to be subjects of ongoing research and debate in the scientific community. Which brings us to a bigger issue. Many of these ingredients have been studied for short-term safety, but haven't undergone rigorous long-term research. So while they're deemed safe for now, we don't really know how they affect health and development years down the line. There is a need for in-depth, long-term studies to determine the function and safety of bioactives in infant formula. For example, synthetic nucleotides are often added to formulas with claims about enhancing immune function. But regulatory bodies like European Food Safety Authority have said there's no convincing evidence they're necessary, and some studies even raise questions about their safety at high levels. In some cases, the current regulatory environment allows claims by brands to be made for food products with low levels of evidence. These gaps leave parents in a tough spot, trusting products that meet today's standards but may not be fully understood tomorrow. Personally, I'm concerned by this. Short-term studies are great, of course. They tell us the product is safe for immediate use. But what about 5, 10, even 20 years down the line? Are these ingredients conducive to a healthy brain and body as our children grow? That's the kind of data we as parents need to make a truly informed decision. So what does all this mean for your baby? And are these ingredients safe, or are we overlooking potential risks? And why don't formula companies make this information clearer? Next, I want to look at how formula is regulated and what's missing from the process. When it comes to what goes in your baby's bottle, the rules might not be as strict as you'd think. In the United States, the FDA oversees both the ingredients in the formula and the finished product. Companies are required to meet specific nutritional standards and follow good manufacturing practices. They also need to test for contaminants like bacteria and heavy metals. But here's the surprising part. The FDA doesn't always approve formula before it hits the shelves. Instead, manufacturers simply notify the FDA that their formula meets the requirements and provide assurances that it meets federal nutrient requirements. During the recent formula shortage, the FDA implemented something called enforcement discretion. This allowed some formulas that didn't fully meet regulations to stay on the market, provided the companies were working towards compliance. Companies had to provide a letter of intent to the FDA by December 5th, 2022, to continue under enforcement discretion beyond January 6th, 2023. For companies that submitted a letter of intent, the FDA intends to continue exercising enforcement discretion if they demonstrate they're working to meet all of the US requirements. And when do they need to demonstrate this compliance by? Well, I wish I knew. I've scoured the FDA website and I can't find a deadline anywhere. The FDA has not publicly announced a fixed deadline for all companies to achieve full compliance. If anyone can provide a source with a deadline, then I would love to read it. Just pop a link in the comments below. This raises a big question. If formulas are labelled as safe but don't meet all the regulatory requirements, how can parents really trust what they're buying? And what happens when something goes wrong, like the Chronobacter sakazaki contamination that led to major recalls and the nationwide formula shortage in 2022? Meanwhile, in the UK, formula is regulated by the Food Standards Agency and the Department of Health and Social Care and follows European Union guidelines. These standards are strict when it comes to nutritional content, but they're not immune to loopholes either. For example, the UK has no specific regulations for the composition, marketing, or labelling of milks marketed for children over 12 months. So while regulatory agencies do a lot to ensure formula is nutritionally adequate, there's still room for improvement. And as a parent, it's hard to shake the feeling that these rules are designed just as much to protect the industry as they are to protect your baby. But that's just my feeling. I want to have a look at how formula companies use marketing to influence our decisions and why the billion-dollar industry behind these tins might not always have your best interests at heart. Formula companies spend billions every year targeting parents, hospitals, and healthcare providers. They sponsor paediatric conferences, give free samples to new parents in hospitals, and run ads that tug at your heartstrings. But there's one key document that they often sidestep: the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. This code, developed by the World Health Organization, was created to protect breastfeeding by restricting the aggressive marketing of formula. It bans things like advertising formula to the public, offering free samples, and using misleading claims about health benefits. But here's the catch. The WHO code isn't legally binding. It's up to individual countries to implement and enforce it. And many don't. For example, in the US, there are no federal laws enforcing the WHO code. Formula ads are everywhere, and hospitals often hand out free samples to new mums. In the UK, advertising formula for babies under 6 months is banned, but companies use a loophole to market follow-on milk, which is nearly identical to infant formula, as a way to build brand loyalty. These ads often make bold claims about brain development, immunity, and digestion. Claims that are technically legal, but not always backed by strong evidence. For example, the addition of DHA in formula, like we said before, is marketed as essential for brain development, but multiple studies have shown it may not make a measurable difference in formula-fed babies compared to breastfed babies. And then there's the emotional aspect. Many ads subtly, or not so subtly, play on parents' insecurities, implying that their baby may not thrive as well without their expensive premium formula. This creates a perception that the more expensive formula means better, even though all formulas must meet the same basic nutritional standards to be sold. So if the marketing feels manipulative and the regulations have gaps, what about the companies behind these products? Let's look at the financial side of formula, how much these companies are making and how that affects what ends up in your baby's bottle. Let's follow the money, because the financial side of formula reveals a lot about who really benefits from this industry. The global infant formula market is worth billions. In 2024, the US formula market alone is valued at approximately $6 billion, based on a variety of sources, with projections to skyrocket over the next few years. And in the UK, the market is expected to grow annually by 5.8%. but just a handful of companies control nearly the entire market. In the US, 3 brands: Similac by Abbott Laboratories, Enfamil by Mead Johnson, and Gerber Good Start by Nestlé dominate, controlling over 90% of the market. In the UK, it's a similar story. Danone owns both Aptamil and Cow & Gate, giving it a massive 71% market share, followed by Nestlé's SMA with 14%. While these brands appear to compete, the reality is that a few corporations are making the lion's share of profits, and their marketing budgets reflect this. These companies invest heavily in advertising, not just to sell their products, but to shape how we think about infant feeding. Let's talk about prices. In the UK, formula prices rose by 18 to 36% between 2021 and 23, depending on the brand. And in the US, premium formulas can cost families thousands of dollars a year. But are these higher priced formulas better? Well, not necessarily. All formulas must meet the same basic nutritional standards. So much of what you're paying for is branding and marketing. That's why some parents are turning to smaller, so-called ethical brands, which advertise fewer processed ingredients or a more transparent supply chain. But even those formulas operate within the same regulatory framework and face the same market pressures as the big players. I wonder if smaller companies with, let's say, different ideas about ethics and nutrition, but who have smaller budgets, might be able to add to the choices that parents have when feeding their babies. Just because a brand is big doesn't mean they're best. It may, and I mean may, be that they just have a larger financial purse. So where does all this money go? Into product development, sure, but also into aggressive marketing and lobbying efforts. Formula companies have been known to influence healthcare policies and sponsor research that conveniently supports their products. In the end, these corporations aren't just selling formula, they're reshaping how we think about feeding our babies. And with so much money at stake, it's no surprise that transparency takes a backseat. I want to move on to looking at ethical considerations and alternative options like organic formulas, pumping and donor milk to help you make the most informed choice for your family. With so much marketing noise, it's hard not to wonder, are there truly ethical or better formulas out there? Or is it just a more polished pitch? Take brands like Kendamil and Hip Organic, which have carved out a niche as ethical alternatives. Kendamil, for example, avoids palm oil and uses whole milk fats, while Hip promotes organic farming practices and simpler ingredient lists. These features appeal to parents looking for fewer synthetic additives or environmentally friendly options. And to some extent, they deliver. For example, formulas that skip palm oil may avoid its link to lower calcium absorption and harder stools. But these cleaner brands still operate within the same heavily processed framework as conventional formulas. And even with simpler ingredients lists, these formulas remain heavily processed products compared to breast milk. So what are the alternatives to formula? If you want to avoid it altogether and breastfeeding isn't working out, pumping or expressing can provide breast milk flexibility without direct breastfeeding. For families struggling with milk production, donor milk sourced from certified milk banks offers another option. But alternatives aren't perfect. Pumping can be exhausting and time intensive, and donor milk is expensive and often reserved for babies with medical needs. It's a reminder there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Ultimately, whether you go with conventional formula, organic options, or alternatives like donor milk, the real question is, are you able to make this decision with the full picture in mind? Transparency, not guilt, should be at the heart of this process. And there's still plenty to say about formula. We haven't covered the different specialty types of formula, the safety of using tap water to mix the powders, and a myriad of other factors. But I hope this has sparked your curiosity and given you a starting point for your own research. Feeding your baby is one of the most personal decisions you'll ever make. And as we've seen, it's not just about picking a brand or a method. It's about understanding the bigger picture. What's in formula, how it's made, who profits, and what alternatives there are. The truth is, there's no perfect formula, and every family's situation is different. The best decision is the one that works best for you and your baby, made with facts, not fear, or marketing spin. My goal here isn't to push you toward any one choice, but to give you the clarity and confidence you need to decide what's best for your family. And if you're in the thick of the early days of parenthood, I'd love for you to check out my video series, The Fourth Trimester, where I dive into all aspects of life with a newborn, from feeding methods to body changes to managing the overwhelming emotions that come with this new chapter. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. What's been your biggest challenge when it comes to feeding your baby? Drop a comment below. I'll be reading and responding to as many as I can. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications.